Welcome to today's GNCC Espresso webinar, all about the labor market. While much has changed in the past 3 years, one constant is that the labor market, both locally and globally, is tight, even by historic standards, and the strength looks like it's set to continue through the year. Even amid layoffs in some sectors, many companies nationwide are hiring, but job openings are still high and the unemployment rate remains low. Employers are facing changes in the structure of their workforce and the demands that are upon them. And recent headlines even indicate that half of Canadian workers will job hunt in 2023 for better pay and perks. And that was according to a recent Canadian poll. So we are fortunate to be joined by experts in the labor market because we are nothing without knowing, having more knowledge, having more data at our hands, but at the same time also to have a strong team by our side. And we do need to know on how to ensure that we can retain and attract the talent that we are looking for. My name is Mishka Balsom, and I will be your moderator for the next hour. Today's webinar is brought to you by partners, and we are pleased to say that Niagara Region's Economic Development and Fedcap Canada, the power of possible, is by our side to enable this webinar. And I'm also pleased to actually introduce to you our amazing panelists who are actually going to speak to the topic of the labor market. We are joined by Landry. He's the Manager of Economic Research and Analysis for the Niagara Economic Development. He's a certified economic developer in Canada. His experience in economic development ranges from business startup services to innovation commercialization, economic research and analysis, and investment attraction. He has been active in various boards and committees relevant to industry in Niagara and has mentored foreign trained professionals new to Niagara for many years. And Vivian, who's the CEO of Workforce Collective. After 25 years of working in the post-secondary education as an administrator, teacher, and researcher, Vivian is bringing her experience leading within workforce development systems to set our organization up for success. Vivian believes in the power of collaboration and shared leadership. Among her team, she cultivates trust, autonomy, and courage, and externally, she seeks opportunities to build partnerships with those who are up for balancing the tried and true with bold and new in order to develop relevant and needed solutions for our workforce. And I'm pleased to say that we have partnered on a number of initiatives with Vivian's organization. And we have Shanthi Rajaratnam, the Senior Director of Service Quality at Fedcap, Ontario, who is a people leader, an entrepreneur, and a driver of change. With over a decade of experience in employment services, she brings a passion for connecting people to the careers that allow them to shine. She's a strategic thinker who connects every decision to purpose and believes in person-centered service delivery. She comes to us from the Muskoka-Kawarthas region, where she was the Director of Workforce Development at Fleming College, overseeing employment services, career services, and literacy programs, and was instrumental in leading employment service transformations. Thank you all for being with us. I'm really pleased to have you. And my thanks also go to all of our attendees and participants. Today's webinar is meant to be a very interactive one. Many of you have provided us with some questions. We're committed to getting to all of them, but may I also encourage you to utilize the chat function to actually add any additional questions or follow-ups that you have. If you wish to enable live transcript, please refer to the bottom of your Zoom screen for that option. And lastly, some of you sometimes during a webinar ask if this session is recorded. It is being recorded and will be made available to you following today's call, as well as on our website. And on that note, I thought maybe in starting out, if I could pass the mic, speaking, to each one of you, of our panelists, to give a quick update or overview of your organization, because we might have people on this call who are not as familiar with what you're offering, but I thought if we each take about 30 seconds to a minute to update everyone, because then we can also make sure that we direct the questions to the right person. And Shanthi, if I could ask you about Fedcap, could you briefly explain what you do?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Fedcap Canada has been awarded the contract for what's called a service system manager for the Hamilton Niagara region. That means we oversee the network of employment service providers across the region and support those service providers in providing service to the job seekers that can be found throughout the region. A service system manager is a new concept, which is part of what the province's employment services transformation, where they have identified organizations such as ourselves to lead employment services across in different catchment areas across the province.
Thank you very much. And Vivian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mishka. It's great to be here. Workforce Collective, formerly the Niagara Workforce Planning Board. So we're building on 25 years of experience of providing local labor market information and insight to our community here in Niagara. And through our transformation just about 6 months ago, we rebranded as Workforce Collective, where we take all of that knowledge and understanding and provide an opportunity to collaborate across the community on research that takes a data-informed starting point and says, okay, what can we do to work together to solve some of our most fundamental workforce challenges? And that's yielding, it's a different approach, but it's building on what we already are known for and inviting new people into the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Vivian. And Blake, over to you.
I work with Niagara Region Economic Development. So we are the Regional Economic Development Office for Niagara. Our role is to promote and market Niagara as a place to do business, invest, relocate here. So essentially my role is economic research and analysis. So my function is to inform economic development in Niagara, as well as our various partners and stakeholders on various aspects of the economy.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you. And Blake, maybe I'll start out with you on some of the questions that have come forward, but one of the first ones, and we've heard this question from a number of individuals, we're still trying as a society, as a community, trying to learn from the pandemic. And the question is, and the perception is that we saw huge changes in the workforce. And now that we're kind of out of it, can you tell us which changes are reverting back to what it was prior to 2020 and which might be permanent or at least longer lasting of some of the changes that we have seen over the past 3 years?
Okay, so since the pandemic, we're actually at an improved state right now. The labor force is up about 4,600 people. Employment is up about 4,500 people since before the pandemic. The unemployment rate now is about 4.8%. Going like before the pandemic, it was about 4.9%. So now we've gotten back to where we were before the pandemic with some minor improvements. However, we've seen some industries have not recovered while others have done quite well throughout the pandemic and now coming out. So the ones that had the best employment gains would be healthcare, social assistance, wholesale, retail trade, finance, insurance, and real estate, professional, scientific, and technical services, transportation and warehousing, and then manufacturing. And then the ones that still have not recovered, that are still at a significant kind of decline in employment, include accommodation and food services, construction, information, culture and recreational industries, business services, other services which would include things like hairdressers and other personal services, and then agriculture. So we have not seen a recovery in those particular sectors. I think that we will eventually see one. So we have seen improvement, but not full recovery yet.
And thank you so very much, because it gives us a good overview of also what we are hearing and what we're experiencing in the marketplace at the same time. Vivian, you are working closely with so many industries, so many sectors. Does your experience mirror that we are seeing, and how is it impacting businesses? And especially one more I'm thinking about is the healthcare sector. We often and regularly hear that there is a few hundred openings in Niagara. We are not able to to fill those positions? Is this here to stay? Is this only throughout this year? Are we looking at that for the next couple of years?
I think I would concur with what Blake is saying about the data. We're seeing that too. But I think from another perspective, that the workforce has been kind of permanently disrupted by the pandemic. I think there is evidence to suggest that in certain sectors, it's business as usual, and it kind of always has been. Some of the sectors that Blake mentioned were struggling for labor pre-pandemic. Some of them were also did not, they were essential services, or they were manufacturing businesses that just continued on, through the pandemic. So they didn't have the close open kind of disruption. They maybe had supply chain disruptions, which gave them problems, but they didn't have the open and close. So I think some sectors are at the same stage as they were pre-pandemic. I think others are struggling, as Blake said, and I think that's because the labor market has got a bit more competitive in a different way. I think in knowledge economy jobs, you've got the rise of remote work, hybrid work. I think that's here to stay. And I think that in the healthcare, you're right, Mishka, there is an awful lot of demand for workers in healthcare. Particularly right across the entire healthcare network. But I think, again, there was some shortages in these areas pre-pandemic, but I think the pandemic itself, it created an explosion there. And there was a lot of people who retired, people who were long-standing retired. And then there's just the lack of labor market ready to come in and fill those jobs, which is leading to some disruption. The same is happening in other parts of the caring economy, childcare, some educational services. All of these kind of roles are leading to some serious disruption, which I think creates difficulties for other parts of the labor market where people can't go to work, because they're taking care of children, or they're taking care of elderly people. So I think shortages in those caring economy jobs, which we're really seeing right now, you're right, there's a lot of vacancies, not just in Niagara, it's across Ontario and even other parts of Canada, are leading to some disruption right across the entire labor market.
And I think, Vivian, you're making an excellent point and saying like how interconnected we are actually. So we can look at it from a sector only perspective, but at the same time, we all are dependent on it. If there's no childcare, it doesn't enable some people to actually take up the work that they need at the same time. So it's an excellent point. Shanthi, both Blake and Vivian talked about the trend in unemployment and how and the impact it has on employers. How are the trends in unemployment affecting your work?
That's a great question. I think it affects it in a couple of ways. More people, I think, are finding jobs on their own. And so that does affect employment services in terms of the volumes of people that we see come through our doors in a labor market such as this are lower, because if you are capable of job searching on your own, chances are you could go find a job on your own. So that's affecting how many people we see, which is unfortunate, because where we really add value in employment services is helping to identify the right job goal for somebody and do career exploration, as well as helping individuals determine how do we put the right supports in place so that you don't just secure a job, but that you also retain that job. And retention, I think, is, that's probably the second concern of employers after they get people. That's one challenge, is how do we find people, but then also how do we keep them in this competitive labor market? So it does also change our work with employers, where we find that employers are much more open to conversations about how to retain the people that they hire through us. And they are also open to ongoing support from us in terms of best practices, ideas in terms of how they can be more competitive when they're trying to recruit employees. And so it provides, as everything, both challenges and opportunities, having a labor market such as this at the moment.
Yeah. Shanthi, actually, on that note, we are in a market here in Niagara that has the presence of an amazing college and university, and those post-secondary institutions have an impact on the local labor market. Sometimes people say that we produce talent here and people take advantage of it, but then we export skilled workers to other regions. But from your experience and knowledge that you have, having a college and university, does it leverage, does it assist the Niagara employment market?
Well, I'll admit that I'm not as familiar with the presences of the college and universities here and how that's impacting. It generally does assist the employment market. Grads very typically would love to stay many times where they've come and gone to school and they've developed community. And it has to do then with how well they can secure employment coming out of their programs, how competitive the employers are willing to be in order to keep them here. And then there's often the other challenges that we find in every community, which is there transportation, is there housing, right? That's the other factor for students when they're trying to decide where they're going to stay.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. And Vivian, your background is the post-secondary, it comes from the many years in the post-secondary one. What is your take on the role of the institutions that we have here in Niagara and the impact that you see that it has on the labor market, of closing some of the gaps or addressing some of those challenges?
I think, yes, with the background in post-secondary education, I would say that there's huge opportunity. And I think any community that is lucky enough, any region that is lucky enough to have good post-secondary institutions in its own community has that opportunity. I think, though you're right, Mishka, I think we do export a lot of the labor. Although I do agree with Shanthi that most people would love to graduate here and stay here, especially if they've come into the region. We hear that a lot anecdotally. I do think, and you mentioned the point earlier, I do think it takes a kind of a creative approach to take a look at our post-secondary institutions, what programs they're studying, what they're graduating from, and how that matches our local labor market. It kind of needs a bit of a strategic approach that would enable not only attraction of students into our area, but then retaining them to feed the labor market that we're building. And that links into a lot of the work that Blake and the team at Niagara Economic Development do around inward investment and growth. I also think that the pandemic did disrupt training and education as well. So I think, it's beholden on our post-secondary institutions to also kind of look at, has training and education changed a bit? What could they be doing upskill or to enable people to access training, post-secondary training and education, maybe not at a full diploma or degree duration, but other types of training which will feed our local labor market.
Yeah, and I think it's an excellent point, Vivian, because we hear from so many employers too that it's our commitment to lifetime learning. So it's not always degrees and diplomas that are driving it, but it's the skill set that we need to develop. And the skill set is changing. It's ever changing. We're pushed to be changed. And I think that is inherently a good one. Blake, I wanted to come back one more time. I'm going to mention the pandemic and then I'm going to stop mentioning it. But there was a lot of speculation that workers in the GTHA would relocate to Niagara for a lower cost of living while working remotely at their previous employers. Did that trend actually manifest? Some of our attendees are wondering about it, and they now have new neighbors and a different community and individuals involved. And what do the numbers tell us?
So that's a great question. And we did talk about certain people graduating, leaving. However, during the case of the pandemic, some of these trends really changed. So we actually gained a net 14,219 people during the pandemic years, so 2020, 2021. And the interesting thing is the largest demographic of that group are 25 to 39-year-olds in terms of people moving to Niagara. And the second largest demographic group are 0 to 4-year-olds. So essentially people with children from the 25 to 39-year-old demographic came to Niagara in a major way through the pandemic years. So yes, it did materialize and it's very evident in the data. We have not seen this type of migration data historically, basically, in terms of our net migration figures. And this is what we're tracking is just people moving into Niagara, not necessarily population growth, but just people coming here.
Yeah, so that's very interesting and good to see, good to know that we're growing. Shanthi, this is a question from one of our attendees, and they're asking, you suggested that grads want to stay in their communities after graduation. I generally agree with you, though I find they're more focused on money, salary, rather than a community. And they wish your thoughts on it. What motivates people to stay in a community? What motivates them to actually move? And I think from an employer's perspective, it's key to having a knowledge of that and understanding it as we're trying to bring and attract new talent into our organizations.
Yeah, I think that that question is accurate, which is, I think the idea of staying in this community that you've established through post-secondary is your first desire, but it's not a strong enough attachment necessarily to offset higher wages that might be elsewhere. And I think perhaps it's more, and again, this is just kind of my guess on the subject, is that post-secondary grads are trying to decide where they're going to settle down in general. And so they are considering all of those factors, and the money and the career are definitely important, which can be frustrating for local employers because it's very hard to be competitive sometimes to employers that are in different jurisdictions. But really, I do think that makes a difference. I think the students aren't just going where the money is, but they're trying to figure out, well, where am I going to live? Where am I going to establish myself and put down some roots? And so we really need to look at the whole picture when we're trying to attract those graduates to our local jobs.
That makes sense. And Shanthi, you brought up a good point, and I was wondering if maybe I can get Vivian's and Blake's take on it, because one of the questions that has come forward is related to the wage gap that currently exists when we look at immigrant employees, women, people of color, people with disability, Indigenous people. Is there, does the data support that there is a wage gap that exists, and or can we also say that during the last couple of years that this wage gap is closing to some degree? And Vivian, I see you unmuted, so maybe I'm choosing you or Blake, either one, who wants to maybe look at that.
I'll excuse me, I'll start, and then I'm sure Blake can come in with some figures. I think, first of all, I would say we need to be careful what we say, what we mean by the wage gap. So there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. One is, the income that is earned by individuals doing exactly the same job. Is there a wage gap there? And then the other one is, in general, what we see in the statistics for Niagara is, the annual wages of different groups of people. So and they may not be working in the same jobs. I think on that latter one, we do see, in the data, a difference between wages earned by men versus wages earned by women, for example. And that's right across all municipalities and kind of in all job areas. And that could be down to the type of work that different groups, in this case, men and women choose to do or are employed in Niagara. But I think more generally across Ontario and Canada, there is evidence and data to suggest that even in occupations, different demographic groups are paid differently, and there is a wage gap definitely occurring there, particularly in more professional employment.
Yeah,
I concur with Vivian. And she made a great point about kind of the occupations, the type of work. And I'm going to add on that kind of the nature of how they are paid. So for instance, there is a wage gap, a gender wage gap, when we look at hourly paid individuals. So the wage gap then is about 11%. When we look at salaried individuals between genders, it's about 27%. It's just because more females work in hourly basis occupations. So it's a very complicated question that we could probably spend many hours discussing, right, because there's so many different variables and things that actually influence what the data says. So we have to be very careful about defining things, and Vivian did that very well at the start, because there is a wage gap. There's no doubt about that. It's just how do we define that? What are we looking at? What are the parameters? What are the occupations? You know, that sort of thing. So that becomes very important when we talk about this type of thing.
Yeah, if I could just support that again, thank you, Blake. I think that it does point to the need for data. We need to know. So data is so important for us to unpack some of these big questions, and they're such important questions. And I agree, Mishka, we need to, you know, narrow the wage gap for all kinds of different groups. But we need to be able to collect the data locally and understand what's going on in the data in order to be able to address the problem. And that is a challenge to get some really well refined local data.
I appreciate both of your take on it. And I think we, even as an organization, have always said that we are data-driven, evidence-based, and sometimes we run into the same difficulty of actually not being able to access it and define it clearly to make sure that we're moving forward with the right solutions. Vivian, I'm coming back to you for one thing, and I think that businesses find that access to talent is the #1 problem right now. And I know that you personally have always had an interest to saying, like, where is the talent shortage distributed? And I think Blake talked about it a little bit, but what are some industries and sectors doing to access the talent? And I think this is really always interesting to hear from for our attendees. We made this topic almost one of our key segments to discuss at last year's Niagara Economic Summit as well. But what are some of the things that could maybe shorten that distribution of talent shortage, that can shrink it a little bit and give people more options?
Right. I think, you know, as we've already said, all sectors are kind of struggling to find talent, and at every level as well. It's not just, it's entry level, right up through some of the more professional jobs. I mean, we had over 3,800 new job postings in Niagara in February. I mean, that was just in the month of February, and they were new. So the vacancies are there. I think again, it's complicated, as seems to be the theme. There seems to be a bit of a mismatch between employers and job seekers. I'm wondering if that's got to do with, for example, the overwhelming nature of the way in which we routinely hire. You know, we use online portals. Employers put jobs up on Indeed and then get hundreds and hundreds of applications, and they get stuck in the process. I think what we're seeing is where employers maybe take advantage, and Shanthi can talk to it more about the services that could be provided through employment services, where they can get more kind of one-to-one almost service to help navigate those systems, where they can, when they're able to engage with the support they need to maybe refine who they're looking for, help with their job descriptions, find in a way narrow down the talent pool so that they know who they're employing. And we also know from some of the work that we're involved in is when employers are kind of broadening the group of people that they would traditionally go and look for in looking for talent, like looking at newcomers and immigrants and folks that are highly trained, but maybe are in a talent pool that employers have never perhaps in the past looked at. When they start to do that with the support of some of the organizations around Niagara that are doing tremendous work in these areas, they're finding better success. But it's just starting. There's a long way to go, but I think we're on the road to finding new ways of helping employers navigate the talent pool.
And I think it will make us better as employers too. I think overall, I think it's an opportunity. I think there's short-term pain in it, hurdles, like we are being forced and pushed to get outside of our own routine, but I think it has great opportunities. Shanthi, is this talent shortage something that Fedcap is able to help with, and how can employers make use of your services specifically?
Absolutely, that's what we're here to do. Employment services is here to help the job seeker, but also the employer. And so I think Vivian painted a great picture there in terms of how we help employers. We can help with how you're posting your job, where you're posting your job, sending you job seekers that we think are job ready for you to screen. And sometimes we can help you identify, and I think this work is happening all over the place, which is it really the qualifications that matter, or are there some certain soft skills and characteristics that actually are more important? In which case, how do we help you match to people who have those soft skills, whether it's dependability and reliability, eagerness to learn, those types of things. And so helping employers find people who fit that mold instead of very specific, stringent qualifications. And also the other thing we do is we can help both the job seeker and the employer identify how to fill training gaps. If there are training gaps, there are lots of skills training programs throughout the region, and it's helping to identify for both sides, how can you access some skills training if you're hiring somebody who maybe doesn't have all of the qualifications that you're looking for right from the onset. So in the Niagara region, we have 17 employment service providers with 24 locations, site locations. And so there's definitely a wide, large level of resource available for employers to reach out to and to engage with, and we can help make that process a lot smoother.
Yeah, I appreciate that actually. And we will provide those resources and links and how employers can actually get in touch with those locations right following actually our webinar as well. I wanted to share with the attendees a couple of things that actually came up in the chat, because I'm not sure if everyone can see the chat. So Blake was kind enough, some of you have asked to look at the net migration to Niagara again in data. So we have 14,200 people that migrated to Niagara between 2020 to 2022, and the largest demographic cohort was 25 to 39 years old and 0 to 4-year-old ones. So it looks like young families actually that are moving here. I think we have addressed some of it, and we will share some of the ways of getting in touch with Fedcap and the locations that are offering some of the services. We'll do this and include this as well. And I want to also acknowledge that some of you have made comments about saying how integrated, like there are more issues than just the labor market, and that the housing market is also playing a key issue in this market situation that we're finding ourselves in, because it's wonderful to find a job and to try to attract new people, but you also need to find them a place to live, and that is a key challenge. And so we acknowledge that and wanted to just mention that. I am wanting to look at Vivian. You are also working on some initiatives that aim to help employers find talent. And we was wondering if there's some specific things that you can suggest for an audience to how to get in touch with Workforce Collective or with other organizations to saying, here are different ways. Shanthi has spoken to it, but I think you are also in the business of offering that to employers and guiding them through the process.
Yes, thanks for that. Thanks for asking this kind of explicitly, Mishka. And I think my comments would build on some of the points that have already been made. Shanti's absolutely right in terms of employers. When employers know what services and who's around the region, and what projects are being run, what programs are being run, we invite employers into those conversations all the time. And I'm sure that all of the employment services organizations would be more than willing to talk to employers. I know at Workforce Collective, some of the project work that we're doing, which is particularly right now focused on immigrant employment and helping to support community partners in their work in ensuring that newcomers into our community are able to access the labor market in the ways that fit their qualifications and their talents. So, one success that we're seeing right now is we're working on a project with our colleagues at the YMCA Niagara Immigrant and Employment Services that is it actually focuses on what employers need and how we can help employers look at the wider highly skilled immigrant talent pool that we have here in Niagara and do a matching. it kind of dehumanizes the kind of way in which we've come to know how to employ people through an online portal, apply here. And I think someone noted in the chat just a few minutes ago, looking for work and then finding it really difficult. They get ghosted or there's no one replies. I think that we need to help employers match with potential staff, with potential recruits. And we're doing that in the context of newcomers, highly skilled newcomers to our community, which is showing some great results. Employers are finding talent where they didn't think to look before, didn't know to look before. And I think when you have a very tight labor market, and this is going to continue for the next few years. This isn't just a blip, I don't think, but with an aging demographic and a lot of retirees on the horizon, employers are going to need to keep doing this. So it's really switching up how employers engage in the recruitment process. And I would really suggest get in touch with the folks around the region that can really help you do that. Shanthi mentioned some, but there's also others in particular sectors that are doing the same.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. Blake, on that same topic, you have worked with internationally educated professionals in Niagara and integrate them into our workforce. Anything that you would say to this and add to this conversation that you think is critical? Sometimes people are asking us, and we always hear this, how diverse is our workforce in Niagara? And if we're looking at it today, if you can give us a glimpse of it and what you think it might look like tomorrow, because I think that in itself is often really good for people to hear.
So I was a mentor, and I still am informally, but under the Niagara Immigrant Employment Connections program, that Vivian's office actually administered that program. And I was one of the first mentors there. And I mentored 13 individuals, and all of them got meaningful employment. Everything from data or like business analysts to engineers to like business professionals, to you name it. It was talent that we needed here. And we've heard this story time and time again, where these people were totally underemployed, working in a call center or service-oriented industry, when they had these like real excellent people skills and technical skills. And I believe that mentorship has still not been promoted enough, or at least we require more programming to encourage more people to do this. I really think that's a strong part of the solution, just because, my anecdotal experience, having spent some time with these individuals, helping them understand how to navigate kind of the job search process, helping them understand how to best present themselves for certain opportunities, doing things like earning micro credentials that help them have some, North American educational credentials, which is often helpful as well. So I honestly believe that's an important part of the solution, and we need to be doing a lot more of that, just because I've seen success personally. And I found a great deal of joy doing that sort of thing, because seeing someone who's underemployed, who's struggling here, to doing well and succeeding and, building a life here, contributing to the economy, like it's very great to see. So I think that we should need both formal and then informal, because the informal stuff, so I still talk to all of these individuals. They still come to me for help. They once in a while, like they're off on their own, but it helps for these individuals to have someone who they can rely on to provide advice as a sounding board, as a confidant. So it is, it's work, and but I find it very rewarding, and I would encourage other people to find a mentorship opportunity, even if it's someone in your neighborhood. I would recommend, having that interpersonal connection, because I really do believe it's part of the solution.
You know what, and when you speak to it, Blake, you can see actually the rewards that we receive when we become a mentor too. And so it's really good to see, and then linking people. It's all of our responsibility to make a difference in there, and I think we can. Shanthi, just a slight change of topic here. With employers under pressure from inflation, rising costs, many are looking to offer perspective like employees non-monetary benefits and perks, like remote work or 4-day work week. Have you seen many employers doing this? And what would you say they give an advantage? Do they provide an advantage? And do you think it can make an employer competitive within the field where we actually move a little bit away from our traditional work structure that we have seen beforehand?
Yeah, I think we're seeing employers do this a lot. So it is figuring out how they can be competitive, whether it's allowing for flexible work arrangements, where that may be a different start time or a different finish time. And even some just changes to the work culture around that. Is it a hybrid model? Are you working from home? And really just being flexible in what job seekers are asking for. And that's making a difference, because as much as we also see employers competing with wages, and we always encourage and like to see employers pay a living wage wherever possible. And the living wage for Niagara region is $19.80 an hour. And so I think that's an important thing to always remind. It's not that we're just saying, hey, job seekers want to earn more. It's that really, in order to survive and to live a fulsome life and a sustainable life, a living wage really makes a difference. So I think that is a key consideration for employers, but wage is not always something you can do. And so if you can't, and it's not the only thing. It's not the only thing that matters to a job seeker. Sometimes this flexibility is what matters more. We, also have shared with me an example of an employer who has offered bonuses if you stay through the whole season. So if a seasonal employer, it's a bonus for retention. And I think that's another, I mentioned it before, but initiatives on behalf of employers to support retention. So what is your work culture? What else do you do to create engagement and community within the workplace so that somewhere where people want to go and feel like they belong? When you think about your workforce in that way, you also create the motivation to stay, right? And so that's how we can, employers can help with retention.
Yeah,
I think that the thing that's encouraging to me the most is, instead of making sweeping changes, is listening to what people are telling you, because we all have different needs. And so it's the flexibility, I think, that's really making a difference to people, which is, working around childcare schedules or bus lines or just some of those. It's not people asking for the moon. Sometimes it's just about managing day-to-day life and making those logistics easier, is the thing that would make you choose one employer over another, right? And so that's something that it's great if employers ask those questions or start thinking about with their employees.
Yeah, and we held recently a webinar actually on the 4-day work week, and it was led by experts from Imagine Canada who've implemented it for their organization. And it was an interesting conversation where we all of a sudden focus not on the logistics 5 days a week, whatever it is, 7.5 hours, 8 hours a day, but we're actually all of a sudden shifting towards what are the interests, what are the wishes of our employees, and what are the KPIs actually that we're delivering on, and really shift that conversation around to that versus saying it has to be in this cubicle during these hours. Vivian, you work with a number of labor market initiatives. I think I'm going to ask you to chime in on this one, because I think you're very passionate about it. But also I wanted to get your input a little bit when it comes to promoting equity, diversity in employment in Niagara and elsewhere. Are there tools that are available? Because so many employers, us including, are seeking to educate our members, us becoming stronger on that end of it. But I'm passing it over to you.
Okay. Thanks for that. I think that question, Mishka, kind of builds on, again, what we've just been talking about over the last little while. Shanthi just talked about how employers are focusing on community. They're focusing on the way they can build a welcoming workplace. And I think that's all part and parcel of the work that needs to be done on the broader issues of kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think there are a lot of resources available. There's a lot of great people that work in Niagara and beyond that can offer any employer some support around building out and thinking through policies and procedures and hiring practices around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think though, for us and in some of the work that we've been doing, you need to take a step back and think about each employer kind of has different needs. And I don't think there's a one size fits all model. And that we need to be cognizant of employers' capacity, to not only start to think about and build out a more diverse and equitable workforce, but also, as Shanthi said too, think about the retention that is required, what they need to do to change their workplace culture, what supports they need in order to help the change management in that, and be able to not only retain or to attract, but then retain more of a diverse workforce. There's lots of resources available. Some of it's available, through chambers of commerce or even through the work that we do. But I think it is down to individual conversations with employers, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I want to change the dialogue a little bit around, and now we've spoken a lot about what is happening in the community and in the Niagara region. We've looked at it through the employer's eyes and saying these are the challenges. Here are ways maybe to overcome it. Here are resources to access, but we also have a few job seekers. And I thought maybe it's also interesting to look at from their perspective, and especially looking at what are maybe some of the in-demand positions. And Shanthi, I was wondering, from that perspective, the perspective of a job seeker, what are the most in-demand fields right now? Where are your job seekers finding work most often? And for employers looking to hire those in-demand workers, what are some of the competitive advantages you see in successful employers that are offering to job seekers? But maybe let's start out by looking, what are some of the in-demand fields?
Sure. When I pulled the numbers in, since January 2021, we've helped through employment services 3,560 plus job seekers secure employment. And so if I look at those numbers, I can tell you what industries they found jobs in. I haven't done this by occupation, but by industry. And so the top few are full service restaurants, hotels, call centers, electrical contractors, janitorial services, home healthcare, supermarkets, and residential building construction. That list makes up more than, probably about 25%, 27% of where all of our job seekers have found jobs. And so that tells you it is true that many people that are coming to us for support are people who are looking for more entry-level positions, and that's kind of reflected in that industry list. I think we've done a good job about talking about what those job seekers are looking for in terms of flexibility. Again, it's not always about the remote work but it's about flexibility with their life, right? If it's childcare needs or multiple jobs in the family or transportation, that's the type of flexibility that attracts somebody to a particular employer over a different employer, is feeling like they can have that conversation or those options. The living wage, like I mentioned before. And the other thing is that our job seekers, through supportive employment services, we're making sure that we support other facets of their life so that they're in a really stable position to be able to retain that job when they get that job. So, that's the advantage of working with an employment service providers. They help you figure out all the other things, like where is my childcare going to be, and how am I going to solve transportation to get to that job. So I don't know that tells us what those job seekers are looking for. What that does tell us is the jobs that they're actually getting in the Niagara region, right? So it's only one half of the story. And I think a takeaway for me is there a disconnect there between what those job seekers would like to be working in and where they are? And if so, how do we help bridge that gap? And how do we bring that information to you and to this group here in order to do some more work with economic development in terms of how do we attach job seekers to some of the other in-demand industries that are struggling to find labor?
Yeah, that's excellent. And maybe it's a perfect segment actually to get Blake into the conversation. From an economic development perspective, Blake, would you say that the composition of Niagara's workforce makes the region attractive to employers?
So yes, and it's not just the region's labor force that we promote now. Like Niagara is within 45 minutes drive of a labor force of 1 million people. So when we're working with international companies looking to come here, like they're aware that the labor force is much larger than our little area. And during the pandemic, it really expanded the size of the labor force. And I've seen even my own colleagues here at Niagara region, now they're recruiting from outside of Niagara. Like there's people from all over the place working here because of some of these new kind of characteristics and trends brought on by the pandemic. So that's good in that companies can pull from a much larger labor pool. However, they're now competing with other companies within that much larger geographical area. So it's challenging, but there's also opportunity there. So that's why it's really important for companies to kind of remain competitive when recruiting employees. One of the biggest inquiries, I get it at least on a weekly basis, sometimes multiple times a week, but they're looking at what are the rates for certain occupations, what types of benefits do I have to offer to be competitive? So they're now really diving into the data in a major way. And this goes across all different sectors. I've worked with childcare, I've worked with manufacturing, I've worked with tourism operators. So we're getting these inquiries all the time. And now this is the reality now. We exist in a much larger labor force, and we have to recognize that, especially when recruiting. So you may not find the perfect person right in Niagara, but you have to expand your net essentially, because it's a much larger labor force, and we're playing in that sandbox now.
And Blake, on that note, actually, are there industries where we are more competitive than other regions, where we're more easily successful in, or industries where we are to some degree less? We often hear, I think Vivian had early on made the point also about healthcare. Some of them skilled trades is, I think, a challenge that is Ontario-wide. Healthcare is Ontario-wide. But are there certain industries where we are more competitive, where we are successful in attracting people to this region?
So I'll start where we're not very competitive, and a way that I do this analysis is just looking at location quotient. So our concentration of jobs in an occupation in Niagara compared to Ontario. So where we lack people, applied sciences, senior management, professional occupations in business and finance, office support occupations, manufacturing assemblers, so more of like the labor-oriented manufacturing occupations, professional occupations in arts and culture, that was a surprise to me, laborers in manufacturing, machine operators and production workers, professional occupations in health, and then finance and administrative supervisors, and lastly, nurses. So that's where we're not competitive right now, because we have a lower kind of location quotient, lower concentration of people working in those occupations. However, we're competitive in all of the other occupations where we have a location quotient of 1 or above, meaning that we are at the provincial concentration or higher. So that's actually pretty good. And that would be comprised of, you know, dozens and dozens of different occupations. So when I approached this question, I really thought, like, the easiest way to tell you is that, you know, this is where we're not as competitive right now compared to the province, but we're competitive in all of the others. And like I mentioned before, Niagara's pretty attractive now for migrants. However, if you looked at the migration data for anywhere in Southern Ontario, like there's people moving everywhere all of the time. And that's one thing that's not very recognized at all. When I gave the 14,000 figure, that's a net. It's important to recognize. But when we look at the actual number of people coming and going to different regions, like there's tens of thousands of people, like, you know, on a yearly basis. So that's important to recognize too, is that the labor force is highly mobile. That's when I say to companies, when you recruit, you have to look at all of Southern Ontario, because people are willing to move, people are mobile, people can work remotely, and these are all major considerations that employers need to look at.
Yeah, and Vivian, to build on what Blake had just mentioned, Can you speak to some changes that maybe are occurring in the marketplace, maybe also the changes that are affecting the labor market? When you look at the labor data that's out there and saying, like, I'm looking back 10 years ago, I'm looking back 20 years ago, and this is where we are today, and I'm seeing those trends. And I'm especially also want to bring in the trend that Niagara is the provincial government has indicated that Niagara is going to see and going to experience a significant population growth and increase like we have not seen previously. We were stagnant for many years, also never met provincial growth target or population growth target. But now we are going to see, I think within 25 to 30 years, that we are actually going to be from 470, 480,000 down to, up to 620,000. So we are seeing a change. How are all these changes affecting the labor market? Actually, and Vivian, I think you might be on mute.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Yes, I would say that when you look back across the data, I mean, I think what Blake had to say there is absolutely spot on, correct. When you look back across the data, yes, we had much more localized labor market, a bit of mobility. We've always tracked the mobility data, where people work versus where they live. And there's always been a bit of going back over the decades, a bit of labor mobility between like Niagara and Hamilton area and back and forth. And you know, for example, employers in manufacturing need to keep an eye out for what's going on in Hamilton in order to be able to recruit and retain people in Niagara. But having said that, I think what Blake was talking about going forward, we are in Niagara part of a much larger and will stay part of a much larger economic development zone across southern Ontario, southwestern Ontario, and particularly the Greater Toronto area. And we're seeing that in projections on growth, you know, housing starts. There's going to be, you know, transportation, if new transportation arteries are enhanced or built, it's going to be easier, as Blake said, for people to be moving around. And as a result, I think all of us, both job seekers and employers, need to think about how all of that mobility will affect our prospects in Niagara going forward. I also think, and we've hinted at this before, even said it before, it becomes a much bigger conversation than just what's going on in the labor market. It is related to economic development decisions that are going to be taken, housing development decisions that are going to be taken, what policies and strategies we put in place for what kind of communities we want to live in. I mean, are we wanting to live in communities that are largely lovely, you know, residential communities and towns where most of the people go elsewhere to work? Yeah. Or do we want to live in where people are working and living and playing locally? These are the kind of bigger picture questions. I think those are some of the community conversations we need to have that will see how the labor market shakes out in the next 10 to 20 years. And they're part of the overall economic development plans. But at the end of the day, there is certain things we're going to need locally. We're still going to have children. They still need to go to school. We're still going to need healthcare. We're still going to need, you know, community activities to do, recreation, you know, things to do to be a lively community. So there's still going to be a growth in those kind of occupations that serve those local needs.
I think, Vivian, you summarized it beautifully. It's that the level of consciousness that we have to bring forward in the decisions that we're making. I have enough time, I think, for one question here. And Shanthi, if I could ask you this one, what are and it has come forward from a couple of people, what are the most in-demand skills you're seeing from employers right now? And is the workforce able to meet those demands? And I'm giving you a minute to wrap it up. So thank you.
Yeah, that's tough because I think they do change. But you know, when we surveyed at one point, we surveyed about 76 employers, and the top 3 soft skills they were looking for were dependability, reliability, and that someone is trainable. So like I said before, it's less about your hard skills because we can teach you those things. Employers often figure they can teach you what you need to know on the job, but it's those soft skills, dependability, reliability, and the willingness to learn or be trained that are kind of the top three things that make a candidate appealing to them.
I think that's an excellent point. I think this is a perfect way actually to wrap up today's webinar. So my thanks to the three of you for being with us and to our attendees for joining us today. And my special thanks go to the Niagara Region's Economic Development Department and Fedcap Canada actually for making and partnering with us on this webinar. To all participants, today's webinar has been recorded, as it has been mentioned, will be made available on our website at gncc.ca, and it will also be emailed to all participants. So thank you so very much for this valuable conversation about our labor market. It's critical to us. It impacts all of us and all of our lives more than we often maybe recognize. So thank you very much for joining us, and my special thanks to the three of you.